Just a quick note before this free video. If you click like and subscribe, I'd be very thankful.
I thought that Emily Beck Rickards was fantastic. I thought overall it was, as movies like this go, like Iron Claw or something, it's like I always, unfortunately, by knowing the story, it's like I always go in there and, well, that's not what happened. And this one, while there are certainly some liberties taken, as there always are in Hollywood movies, this was much more accurate than I expected. I mean, there's obviously stuff that wasn't, but it wasn't like the Von Erich, Iron Claw, where I was just bombarded with it, right? Where this didn't happen here, and this didn't happen like this, and this is just made up. I mean, most of this stuff was pretty much, the real deal. I thought that in some ways it was very simplistic in a lot of ways. But I mean, I enjoyed it. I thought it was a good movie. I wouldn't call it a great movie or anything like that. And I don't know. Now, again, I guess tomorrow morning, I'm going to go look up and see, how it did at the box office. I know you went and you were like the only person in the theater practically, right?
Yeah, I was at a matinee and there was nobody else there. So I don't imagine that it did well. I was actually surprised.
I don't either.
I was surprised that it wasn't hard. Like, I was happy that we had several theaters in the Bay Area who had it. It looks like a couple of others are kind of wait and see if they were going to put it in there, because there were listings for it, but it was like one showing and then that was it. It was like there was like a Thursday night showing and that was it. So, but yeah, there was no, and I've seen others and other people saying, yeah, there's like a handful of people or just, a few, but I was going to go see it no matter what. I was just happy that I was able to see it.
Yeah. The one thing that I noticed is, again, the debuting last night is I got a few friends who wrote me about it, but I got very little feedback, like shockingly little. And on, on Twitter and everything, I was looking through and it's like, other than like you and a couple of other friends of mine, nobody else was talking about it. It wasn't like people were going. I even said, like, if you have any questions, and it wasn't like anyone had questions. So it's like, wow, people, I don't really think that many people watched it. I mean, I would encourage you, just because, again, it is part of the history of this industry, especially women's wrestling, which was, came later than men's wrestling. And, they had a lot of obstacles to go through, being banned, the idea that, it was basically, in its infancy, it was considered like a sex show. You know what I mean? I mean, it had a very negative stigma to it, but Mildred Burke really was, the Ronda Rousey, you know what I mean? Where she took it from, I mean, it existed, but she became like a legitimate, like, drawing card and star, during a period where there was, very little in the way of women athletes and everything like that. And, I mean, they had, they had the tennis players and the golfers and the figure skaters and the, like that, but it wasn't, certainly nothing close to what we have now. And, there was a somewhat of a boom period, probably, I'm going to say late 40s into about 52. And then it just collapsed, which, collapsed at the same time as the fallout between Mildred and Billy Wolf. And then it went down. And then, you had those 3 decades, from the mid 50s and, through the Moolah era, to where it was, women came to your territory for 1 or 2 weeks a year. The matches were kind of boring. It was an attraction. Sometimes it drew, sometimes didn't, but it wasn't like, anybody like Moolah or any of them were drawing cards. And then, you went through the period, the early WWE, where they tried with Wendy Richter, then they gave up, then they didn't do much, even though the Jumping Bomb Angels had some great matches. A lot of the promotions didn't even touch it. Then you had, the revival with, the models, and where they didn't care about the wrestling and it was just the TNA show. And then, we had like, really in this country, obviously it was always big in Japan, or it was big in Japan at certain points. And then in other points, it wasn't so big, but it was very high quality. And then you had, the stuff really, the Gail Kim Awesome Kong stuff in TNA that was kind of the revival of that. And then, the Paige and Emma and Charlotte Flair stuff in, then the Horsewomen in NXT. And, finally, Vince, kicking and screaming, let them do, let them punch and let them, didn't say that, you have to wrestle like women, not like guys, and finally let them wrestle like guys. And, you have this era where, women's wrestling is by far the biggest it's ever been in history. Like, Mildred Burke was very, very big, I mean, in extent, to the extent that at her peak, she probably was in some years, like the number 10 draw in wrestling, never number 1 or number 2 or anything like that, but she probably was number 10. I mean, I remember booking 52, the yearbook that I got, and, like listed her, and then they would have, I saw stuff in from newspapers where they had the 10 biggest draws in wrestling. And, it's like, you had the male stars, and then she would always be like number 10 on the list. Like, you have to put her in at number 10, but it's like, just because you sort of have to. So that's what her role kind of was. It wasn't like, like Becky Lynch, who had, who was at one point, the biggest star in wrestling for a short period of time, nothing like that.
Yeah. Well, if we don't have questions, I do have some questions for you. I'll quickly say, I liked the movie. I don't think there was a specific scene or a specific performance that I thought was on the level of the Iron Claw, even though I had a lot of the same issues as you did with the Iron Claw. Like, there were moments in the Iron Claw that even though I was sort of skeptical about things, that I thought were awesome.
I mean, I cried during Iron Claw. I certainly didn't cry during this.
Yeah. And what's interesting is, the director of this movie was?
Yeah.
So I believe the director is the son of John Avildsen, who directed Rocky.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And the Karate Kid. So John Avildsen's really his recipe was the underdog story.
Mm-hmm.
And so because of Ash, I thought, oh, we're going to get some of that, like, really, like, we're really pulling for this woman and, everything is against her. And I actually thought they leaned away from that a lot in this movie. Like, they did not dial up the Billy Wolf character as much as they should have, because it would have made Mildred Burke's character so much more compelling, I thought.
They really took it easy on the promoters in this movie, other than the promoters for Clara Mortensen, who they, you know what I mean? It's like Billy Wolf was, I don't want to say he was sympathetic, okay, because he wasn't, but Billy Wolf was, like, by today's standards, and even by the standards of the 1940s and 50s, he was an absolute scumbag. I mean, he beat those women. They had to sleep with him to get the best bookings. I mean, that's just how it was. I mean, and in those days, I mean, the women that they attracted, it's like, they were like stars, right? They could go to buildings and be stars. They weren't normal people. So, they were willing to do it for the fame, just like, a lot of people would now in different ways, right? You just, like, and it almost reminds me of, like, how everyone, no matter what comes out on Vince, the talent, we were talking about with Sonya Deville, right? Just a perfect example. It's like, I like, but even like other people that Vince, like, had every reason to be mad. And it's like, oh, they were so benevolent because Vince Vince took us out of being nobodies and put us on TV, and we became somebodies. And Billy Wolf, well, they eventually did get on TV in the 50s when television happened, but he got them in the newspapers, right? Well, he got them in the newspapers, or probably got them radio interviews when they would come to town and promote stuff. They were somebodies. They would sign autographs and all that. And they were, what else would they have had in life? But, it's like they all knew the game. And, it was interesting because Mildred and Billy needed each other and hated each other and were married to each other. And, created women's wrestling. But at the end, they just couldn't get along. And, the stuff with Mildred and Billy's son, that was legit. That was real. Where Mildred is married to Billy, although it's a sham of a marriage, and probably always was. And, Billy, Mildred wanted a chauffeur because she was tired of all the driving she had to do. So Billy had his son, G. Bill, become her driver. And then, they were sleeping together and everything like that. And he went to Billy, to, for his permission to propose and get married, get a divorce and get married. And Billy was just like, just no way you could do that. The one thing that they didn't do, okay, there's a fight scene. So so Mildred's like a legitimate, athlete, treated as somewhat of a legitimate athlete, but highly paid by the standards of the time. I don't know about $1 million athlete, but whatever. But she was, she was certainly well paid by the standards of the time.
Even with him taking as much money as he took from her cut?
Yeah, probably. Although it's not like she didn't save, she didn't save a ton, but she did live, in the Hollywood Hills with all the celebrities. You know what I mean? She did have the fur coats and the I wouldn't say the diamonds, because she thought she had the diamonds. He would buy him diamonds, and when it came out, during the divorce, she found out that it was they were not nearly as valuable as she thought they were. They were like fakes, but she lived like a star for those years. And in 52, she would have been late 30s. And mid to late 30s. And, the whole thing was about, looks. It really was. And, Billy found Nell Stewart, who was a pinup girl looking girl, you know what I mean? Who, so originally, like, Nell Stewart was, Billy, the one thing that Billy, was so far ahead of the time on was weight training for women. Because, even in that era, guys didn't even weight train because it was supposed to, make you stiff and slow, and you should never do it in sports, which, was just ridiculous. But that's what the mentality was. I remember Henry Wittenberg, who was the greatest American wrestler of the 40s. Henry Wittenberg was the only, one of the few athletes at the time who lifted weights. And he ended up being this like unbeatable American wrestler lifting weights. And all the coaches told him, stop lifting weights. So he would like sneak away and still lift weights, because he knew he was getting stronger. And, in wrestling, that was really important. But for women, Billy trained Mildred had like the arms and the back and everything like that, that, no women had in those days. So that was one of the things of kind of like, look at the biceps on this, the pictures of Mildred in the 40s with the double bicep and everything. That was like a pretty famous poster. I remember even in the 70s when I first started watching wrestling, I'd seen the Mildred Burke double bicep photos, which, as you can imagine, in the 40s was just like freaky thing. But she was not like, she was considered attractive, but she got older, and especially in those days when, it was different, people aged quicker, whatever. That she's late 30s and it's time. So Nell comes in, and Nell was essentially, I guess she was a pretty girl who Billy just, like with Mildred and like with the other women, just had her train and train and train. And by doing so, she had this very fit body, pinup girl body, and she was becoming the most popular of the women wrestlers. Mildred was getting older. So Billy wanted to make Nell Stewart the world champion. And, went to Mildred and it's like, it's time, drop the title. And, Billy was sleeping with Nell, of course, at the time. And Mildred was just like, I will never lose to her. And there's a scene in the movie where Billy's, beating the shit out of Mildred. And it was actually not just Billy, it was G Bill and Billy both. The son, so you had two guys, Billy was a tough guy, wrestler. And Mildred was not the only woman that Billy beat. I mean, like when they had a Mae Young character who, and that was, I think that the Mae Young, I mean, I don't know. I think, Jim Ross had a lot to do with it. Mae Young, Oklahoma, Jim Ross, Oklahoma. I think that maybe the portrayal of Mae Young was kind of weird because it's like she was kind of there and portrayed as something more maybe than she was, like Mildred's good friend, when in reality, like Mae Young, resented Mildred because, Mae's job was always to put Mildred over. And, after that ran its course, she didn't get the great bookings because Mildred beat her in all these cities. So it's kind of like, now it's time for another contender. And Mildred was Mae was never going to get the championship and resented it because she thought she was the toughest of all. But whatever. So anyway, Nell's about to they beat the shit out of but so I guess I could go the when Billy and Mae had a falling out in some way, and I don't know what happened, but they booked them both. Well, Billy booked Mae to Mexico City for Salvador Luderoth, and he was down there, and there were probably other women there too. It was probably booked like some of Billy's women, and Billy was there, and Billy beat the shit out of Mae. Like just beat her up bad to the point where she quit. And I think that's what he did, was to make her quit. And she did quit wrestling for a long time. She ended up coming back, of course. But, and she was actually with Mildred in the Japanese tour, which is another story. So anyway, there's just a million stories to go through. But so they wanted Nell to be the champion. And she was the top drawing card. And so, Mildred wouldn't lose. And they beat the shit out of Mildred, and she refused to lose. And that's when they started with the divorce and everything like that. And so they had the split, and the NWA, the actual story, the NWA had meetings to figure out what's going to happen, because with these two people, because it's kind of like they refuse to work together anymore. So who do you go with? Mildred was the big star. Billy was the promoter. Every NWA promoter, every wrestling promoter at the time was a man. Okay. It was not a women's thing. They basically told the two of them in the divorce, you've got to work it out. It's only going to be one of you. Okay. So you work it out. One of you buys the other one out. So Billy offers Mildred $10,000, which in those days is a lot of money. Offers Mildred $10,000 to buy her out. She says no. She offers Billy $30,000 to buy him out. He says yes. They make a deal where Billy has a 5-year non-compete. So she, Billy's out. She's going to be the booker. She's going to run the company. She's going to own the company. She got all of the women wrestlers, and women's wrestling at that point was still pretty popular. It had not really started to fall. We had a very, very rapid fall at this point. When they had to split, they had a very rapid fall because Mildred was not a promoter and Mildred was not a businesswoman. She was a wrestling star. And then, Billy, with his 5-year non-compete, what happens is he started a new company, but the president and the people who he didn't use his name. It wasn't Billy Wolf running it. It was June Byers, who was Billy's daughter-in-law, and Nell Stewart, who was soon to be Billy's second wife, were listed as like the promoters. But Billy was running everything. So it was basically Billy's back in business right away, going against Mildred. And, the promoters are booking both, but Mildred's still the big star because she's the world champion, because Nell never beat her. They made Nell the U.S. champion. But the world champion still meant a lot more then. Okay.
Mhm.
So what Billy did was he created a tournament. He had a tournament in Baltimore, and Nell Stewart was going to win the tournament. So Mildred goes to Baltimore, where the tournament is, and of course they do the grandstand. We're having a tournament for the world title, and Mildred is invited in the tournament. Of course, of course she can't do the tournament. She's not going to do the tournament, but she goes to Baltimore. She does all kinds of media interviews the week of the show and says it's all fake. Billy's tournament is fake. And remember, this is an era where nobody would ever say it's fake, right? It's not, I wouldn't say fake isn't even the word. It's all fixed. This tournament is fixed. Nell Stewart is going to win this thing because she hated Nell. And then the day of the tournament, it was like everybody knew Nell was winning, and Billy changed the finish because he felt he had to, and June Byers won. So in the end, Nell never did get that world title that she was promised. June Byers was the champion, so it's 53. And June's defending her title. Mildred's defending her title, and they're not drawing. And essentially, it came down to, women's wrestling was dying, and the only thing they could do, because both companies were about to go bankrupt, is Mildred Burke and June Byers have a match. And it's a shooting match because essentially the winner would get to control. I mean, it's the highest stakes shoot match, ever in women's wrestling and maybe even in men's wrestling, because the winner would not only be the world champion, but the winner would essentially, by holding the championship, by the company holding the championship, the winner could stay in business, not a guarantee. The loser was going to be out of business.
How did they promote that, though? If all of the matches are worked like matches, and now they have a shoot match, they're not telling the public, like, oh, this time it's real.
No, not at all.
And so to the public, the match is not as good as it would have been if it was a work.
Oh, the match was horrible because it's two women, who, I mean, like as wrestlers, they had a certain degree of skill, but it was not, shooting was not that exciting. And, and again, you go to a work pro wrestling match and then two guys actually shoot. It's just like, it throws you off, and it's not exciting at all. And the match was horrible, by all accounts. So they have the match, and Mildred's knee, which had been bothering her, went out, and the other thing was, June was a lot bigger than Mildred. June was probably, Mildred says that June was 180, she was 140, maybe maybe a little exaggeration, maybe not at all. But June had, gained weight, gotten strong, trained with Ruffy Silverstein, who was a former NCAA champion wrestler, while Mildred, Mildred didn't have that level of training or anything. So Billy thought, Mildred's close to 40, June's bigger, stronger. I've been training her with a wrestler, giving her a lot of time off. June did wrestle for like the 2 or 3 months leading up to it, but like maybe 10 matches in 3 months, or 12 matches, or, it wasn't a lot, maybe, whereas Mildred was still working a pretty full schedule. So, everything was, I think Mildred, in her eyes, because she'd helped train June when June first started wrestling, I think Mildred sort of saw the idea that, I'm superior to her, because when she started, she was, but June had been getting, a lot of training, and Mildred and June hadn't seen each other since the breakup. So that's 2 years and everything like that. And, she was surprised how big June had gotten. And, but Billy was confident that Mildred was going to lose. And they had the match, which is in the movie. And the movie,
it's the climax of the movie.
It's the climax of the movie. And so in the match, Mildred's knee goes out and she gives up the first fall. And they pop the knee back in place. She comes out with a bad knee, and goes, I know that Jeff Leem's book had it 1 hour and 3 minutes was the time of the match. I remember as a kid growing up, it was always 53 minutes, but who's to say he did more research on it than I did?
Mm-hmm.
But it's the match was so bad, and there had to be a winner. And eventually, because what was happening was Mildred just defending. June couldn't take her down. And then as it got going, because June's the larger woman, June was starting to get tired. So, Mildred's story was if it kept going and it was no time limit, June was about to break. Who knows? Maybe that's Mildred's version. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, it's so bad that the athletic commission that's there just stopped it. And just like, and the fans are hating it. They're booing, and they're expecting to see like the two, this great classic match, and they're seeing the shoot match that not anyone understood. And it's like one of those funny stories about how these people were seeing history before their eyes, and none of them understood that they were, and they all thought it was the worst thing they ever saw. Kind of like maybe like when I was a kid with Ollie and Inoki, you know what I mean? It's like, this is freaking horrible. But now it's like, it's history. Books have been written, many books in Japanese, and some in English, and it's the birth of mixed martial arts and everything. And Muhammad Ali actually did like a real fight with a wrestler and blah, blah, blah. You know what I mean? It's like history, but back then it was just a shitty fight. And this is the same thing, just a shitty match. And
do you think people are gonna think Floyd Mayweather and Conor McGregor in 25 years was this great fight? I don't think so.
No, because it wasn't monumental, and it was also under boxing rules. If when Conor McGregor was in his, if Floyd was in his prime, and he did an MMA fight, I think that probably would have been remember something really, really big, but not doing a boxing match.
Yeah, James Toney was also like 15 years too old, and
he was too old,
40 pounds too heavy or whatever he weighed in that night.
Right. Yeah. So they go in there and it's ruled whatever, no contest, right? So Mildred basically told the announcer and just goes, it's 2 out of 3 falls. I only lost 1 fall, so it's a draw. It's no contest. So I retain the championship. So Mildred in the arena that night, they announced, it's a draw. She didn't win 2 falls. She retains the championship, which is how the movie ends. And it ends like it's triumph, but it was not triumph because Billy sent the telegrams out and the newspaper and everything like that basically just said June Byers won 1 fall to none before it was stopped. So June Byers is the legitimate world champion. And all the magazines that were, important in those days that covered professional wrestling, when June won the title, they were all backing Mildred because Mildred's been champion for years and June didn't beat her. And now it just changed to everyone. June won the championship and Billy won the war because of that. And essentially, Mildred had very few matches afterwards. Nobody would book her because, everybody wanted Billy in the world championship. If you booked Mildred, Billy, you couldn't get any of Billy's talent. Everyone went with them. So Mildred's career was largely over at that point, other than a couple months later. Mildred was the star brought over to Japan for the first women's wrestling in Japan. They had a big show at Sumo Hall, and Mae Young was on the tour, and Gloria Berrettini and Ruth Boat-Colley, and there are several others. But anyway, Mildred's on this Japanese women's tour, and that was the beginning of Japanese women's wrestling. And so she became like in Japan, she became like Luthez, right? The first world champion to go to Japan, even though she had already lost to June, but she still claimed she was champion because she didn't lose. She had her belt, and in Japan, it's like it's the famous, you know, um, you know, um, Mildred Burke. So she goes there, and there's underground Japanese wrestling and everything like that, in the 50s and the 60s. And then finally, when All Japan Women started, they used the idea that the world champion was the direct lineage of Mildred. So it was, and Mildred, they booked wrestlers from Mildred. The early All Japan Women stars were booked by Mildred. And Mildred, gave them, Mildred would go there and authorize, this is the real world championship, the famous red belt that, Chigusa Nagayo and Jaguar Yokota and, all those people, Manami Toyota, Aja Kong, Bull Nakano, all those people won. So she's like that Lefty O'Doul, who was big. Lefty O'Doul, who was a famous baseball player in the United States, but in Japan, he's revered because he's the first one to go there and live there and teach them baseball. And Babe Ruth, who did go there for some games as well, they're like Babe Ruth and Lefty O'Doul are like the pioneers of baseball. Luthez is, because he was the first world champion to go there and face Ricky Dozan, he's like the pioneer of wrestling with the Sharp Brothers. And Mildred, is the pioneer of women's wrestling. So that was like her last act, was she ended up being that person in Japan. But so that was the story. But there's so many other things. I mean, the only thing, I guess, as far as like most of the stuff was pretty accurate. Billy was not portrayed as bad as he should have been portrayed. I think the NWA promoters were not, because they backed Billy and were pretty much, their basic thing is that wrestling is a man's business. And even when Mildred bought the rights to promote, it was kind of like they let Billy back in, and they didn't, they basically double crossed Mildred, who, went out of business, and everything. And the other one would have been, in the movie, there's a scene where Gladys Killam Gillum dies after a match. And of course, Gladys Killam Gillum lived for decades after this.
She's in the Lipstick and Dynamite documentary.
She's in Lipstick and Dynamite. I don't remember when she died, but I remember writing up when she died.
It's like 2009 or something like that.
Yeah, she lived to be very old. Yeah. So the woman who died, which is funny though, because it's like it would have made a better movie if they had told this story, but they instead just have one of the women in the troupe, Gladys Killam Gillum, was one of Mildred Burke's early opponents, in the even before Mae Young, Gladys Killam Gillum was around in that thing. So the person who died was actually oh God, what was her name? God.
You're talking about the adopted daughter.
Yes. Wolf.
Is it
Janet? Janet Wolf. Janet Boyer Wolf. Okay. So she was from a Minneapolis woman who's like a teenager, like 17 years old, and wants to be a wrestler, and was a shooter, in an extent. She wrestled men in the carnivals and wrestled and everything like that growing up. So she kind of was like a real wrestler, but she was small, but she was the same size as Mildred. So Billy essentially adopts her with the idea that, she's 17, 18 years old. And that, when Nell and June run their course, that Janet Wolf, the adopted daughter of Billy, is going to be the world champion. He's going to, have her, and so he had started her. She had just started wrestling, and they were going to put the World Junior Heavyweight Championship on her as a rookie. They had already said it. Billy had already bought the belt. And so she would be defending this championship. So she's like the understudy, like the U.S. champion or something, and always getting ready for this world title. And then when the time is right, she's going to be world champion, maybe when she's 25 years old, but not at 18 or anything like that. So she had, which may have been a brain aneurysm in one of her early matches. but she was having horrible headaches. She kept going because, you know, this was not a situation where, I don't know how it was, you know, in the movie, it's not that Billy forced her to go against her will. Billy didn't know. She didn't want to tell Billy because she thought, well, I'm going to disappoint him. I'm not going to win the title. So then, you know, she has, she is in a match, and she's just in horrible pain. And it was a show where she was going to wrestle twice. So she does her singles match. She's you know, just hurting like crazy. There's a story she ate a big meal. I don't know. Comes back, wrestles again, you know, basically collapses and dies that night. And so that's the actual story. And, you know, it made news all over the country, but the clippings were basically that, so Mildred and Billy were still married at this point, officially, right? They hadn't done the public divorce. I don't think Mildred had anything to do with Janet, you know, but, you know, Billy did. And then, but because Billy's not famous and Mildred is, you know, all the stories were, you know, the 18-year-old adopted daughter of Mildred Burke dies in a wrestling match, which also obviously, you know, a death of that, you know, a lot of states banned women wrestling because they thought it was a sex show, you know, women in bathing suits rubbing against each other, very, very negative stigma in a lot of states. And then this woman, you know, this girl, you know, 18-year-old, I think, and she dies. So that makes it even worse. You know, a lot of newspaper stories. How do we let this in? You know, this woman just died, blah, blah, blah. So that was, you know, that was a story. So I don't know why they didn't push that it was like Billy's adopted daughter, then they made it somebody else, because I think it makes for a better movie to tell the actual story.
No, I agree with you, because when I realized that was the scenario, I was like, they didn't have to do it that way. Maybe it was just easier to do it that way, but it didn't make for a better story, I didn't think. By the way, what did you think of Camille as June Byers?
I thought she was good.
Yeah, I thought she was. I thought she was good.
Yeah. Oh, so in the movie, Mildred did first hurt her knee wrestling at the carnivals,
but it wasn't June Byers.
But in the movie, it's June Byers as a fan out of the stands, you know, who drove from Texas to wherever to fight Mildred, and Mildred beats her, and then she clips her knee and all that, and that's where Mildred's knee problems come from. And Mildred's knee problem did come from wrestling in the carnivals, when her knee went out, but obviously it was not June Byers who did it. But yeah, June Byers, you know, it's so, the irony to me, you know, it's just weird. It doesn't, I don't know if it means anything, but like Camille, you know, Camille got the role designed for Charlotte Flair, you know, and as weird coincidence has it, Camille's husband was Charlotte Flair's husband. So, you know,
the other thing that was kind of interesting, but Mae Young, played by the daughter of Clint Eastwood.
Yes, that's right.
Toni Storm did not. She had like one or two lines, and you know, everything that you sort of saw in trailers or whatever. She just looked like Clara. Did wrestling stuff.
Clara Mortensen, who was the original late 30s rival when you know, when Mildred won the world championship. Like Clara Mortensen was going around as the world champion, and then you know, and it was actually portrayed, you know, like it was, you know, like Mildred never lost, and then they agreed that Mildred would lose to Clara, and in the end, at the end of the, you know, they would do a series of matches, and in the end, Mildred would win the championship. And then the promoters of Clara did double cross Billy and say she's not doing the job, and they did beat Billy up, you know, the four guys. That actually happened just like that. And Mildred did take the title from her, double crossing on the finish, you know, so that actually happened. I mean, watching that, you know, I would think someone would just go like, this is all Hollywoodized. And it's like, that actually is how it went down. I mean, obviously the match wasn't with all the high flying and the monkey flips and all that, or the punching and the kicking.
Or
Like
what about saying that goes against the script? They use the word script a lot in this movie.
Yeah. Did you catch the Scott Hall promo that Billy Wolf did?
Billy Wolf definitely did Scott Hall.
There
was another controversy creates cash was another line that was
they stole
used.
the Eric Bischoff line. Yeah.
There's a Vince McMahon mention, even though Vince McMahon would have been like 11 years old. Vince McMahon.
No, but they meant the father.
No, the father. So no, the father was in the scene with Cornette.
Yeah, right.
But then he said, even my son thinks that having the promoter in the angle is over the top or something like that.
Okay.
So it's just like just a funny mention to get Vince Jr. in there, but Vince Jr. would have been like 11 years old and not
even met his father yet. Yeah.
Yeah. So
yeah, well, so Vince Jr. was born in 45 in this match. So 9, no, because Vince didn't meet his father till he was 12.